Well, hello there. Hey everyone, it's Marie Deveaux. Welcome to my channel. This is the Resonant Leader podcast. This is a series that explores leadership, communication, and inclusion through real conversations. My name is Marie Deveaux. I am the host of this channel. If you are new here, please do all the things that new people should do. You can like this video, you can subscribe to this channel, you can drop a comment because all of those things help me as a creator to get my ideas out in the world. I do appreciate you doing all of those things. Typically on this show, I like to invite other contemporaries of mine for conversations, and we talk about leadership. We talk about being light workers, which means doing good things to help more people be fully expressed in the world. And this week, I am rocking it solo for today's topic. But I'm really excited to have you all join me here on this channel. If you're joining live, thank you for that. Please drop a comment so I know that you're here. And if you're watching it as a standalone video, having it already been recorded, I appreciate that as well. So thank you for tuning in and for subscribing to this channel, for participating in the conversation. That's what it's all about. This week, we are talking about misattunement and what it costs us. And that is because all conflict begins with poor communication. More specifically, it begins when people do not listen for what someone else is actually trying to communicate or trying to express. And some people hear the words that we're saying, but they may not hear the meaning that's behind them. And that's the big problem. So again, if you're just joining, my name is Marie Deveaux. This is the Resonant Leader, a space where light workers and leadership coaches and community facilitators can have real conversations about the nuance of leading, communicating, and co-creating a better world. Again, I am your host. My name is Marie. I am an inclusive leadership coach, an author, and an armchair philosopher. I will add that to my list of accolades. But today we're talking about the cost of misattunement and how conflict can turn into verbal violence and what that causes, what that looks like. So when I think about what verbal violence means, I'm always struck because I did not realize that verbal violence was not a phrase that existed outside of the everyday lexicon. It is a phrase that I am particularly familiar with, and a concept that I have become accustomed to hearing and being familiar with in BIPOC spaces and LGBTQIA+ spaces, because the language has to do with violence, right? It has to do with what happens when words are used to make other people feel smaller, to feel less than. And so I think maybe it's more familiar for those of us who are maybe in spaces where we are marginalized or not as accepted as part of the mainstream or dominant culture. But these are essentially the ways that language can be used to erase, diminuize, or minimize the lived experiences of other people. So if you don't experience that personally, I love that for you. That is lovely. That is something that I have experienced and I do have firsthand experience with. And so that is something that we're going to talk about today because I recognize that is not universal for folks. Today's conversation is going to be anchored in three main teaching points. I do try to stay on topic. First is going to be defining verbal violence. Second is talking about why it is important for, why is it important? Y'all, my teleprompter is doing the most right now, and I'm trying to stay on brand and on message, but oh my gosh, the thing is like scrolling like crazy. But the first is talking about verbal violence. The second thing that I want to really share with y'all is why leaders need to self-regulate as part of a nonviolent act, right? And so we're going to be talking about nonviolence in communication. That's one of my favorite things. And then the third thing is really looking at the difference between resolution and navigation when it comes to conflict. So first, I'm going to share my own story of misattunement and the impact of verbal violence. I think it was probably 2019 when I first entered into a formal coach training program. I was with maybe 18 other people, other coaches and leadership professionals who were seeking to continue their learning in the coaching space. And then there were two kind of mentor coaches on staff and a bunch of other support coaches in that program. But in a room of like 18 to 20 to 25 people, the room was majority white. It was also majority female, which tends to be the kind of the norm in the coaching space. So I was one of 3 Black identifying people in the program, and then one of them dropped off. So there were 2 chocolate chips in this big old cookie. And so even with just the 2 of us in that space, that's pretty typical in terms of percentage of representation you would see across the United States, right? So, to be one out of, um, 15 to 18 people, that's pretty typical in most spaces in the United States, unless you're in a specifically, um, you know, in a neighborhood or in a community that is specifically designed for people of color, right? So I'm in this training. I'm one of the few, one of the onlys in the room, and the training itself included some pretty deeply problematic exercises. In the coaching space, we talk a lot about folks really being able to recognize their survival mechanisms, recognizing the way that they put up defenses or barriers to relationship to other people. And usually those things happen because we are trying to protect ourselves from threats that aren't truly threats, right? And so through hypervigilance, we sometimes distance ourselves from experiences that could be negative, when in truth, those experiences could be really positive. Those could be opportunities for us, right? And it's a very common thing to talk about in the coaching space. And so in one of these exercises, they had created a scenario where they asked people to imagine a number of different situations they were in, and then you would prompt them like, how do you know you're going to be in that space? How do you know you're going to be in that space? To start to elucidate a pattern of where people's defense mechanisms show up. And one of the examples in this exercise was, okay, well, if you got pulled over by the cops, how would you be in that space? Now, like I know, especially in the United States, being pulled over by the cops is not a neutral, situation in terms of safety. Okay. One could say in our current climate, being pulled over by ICE or being approached by ISIS is not a neutral experience in terms of safety, right? So if we're going to be using prompts to help people identify some of their patterns in terms of places where they exercise self-defense unnecessarily, that's not one of them, right? Talking about law enforcement is not one of them, especially for people of color, especially for people of varied immigrant status, right? That is not a survival mechanism question. That is a survival question, right? So I raised this to the mentor coaches, and I said, this is inappropriate, and it was not met with warm reception, right? There was another assignment that they provided us that had us watch the film Crash. And it was meant to be, the film Crash was meant to be an instructive exploration of the concept of integrity. And if you're not familiar with the film Crash, that film is filled with sexual, physical, and psychological violence across multiple ethnic groups. It also really centers a white savior trope. I think when the film first came out, it got like all types of awards and was like up for an Oscar and all of these things. That is a film that has not aged well at all. And so I raised these concerns and I explained to the mentor coaches, to the folks running the program, hey, like these exercises are really offensive to me and they are harmful to my sense of personhood, right? Because these films are essentially, the film in particular was really kind of glorifying a demonization of Black bodies, of female bodies. When we talk about getting pulled over by the cops, I'm like, this is not taking into account the lived and cultural experiences of people who look like me, who have a lineage similar to mine, right? And so I raise these things because I'm like, hey, this is landing as violent, as harmful to me and my relationship to myself, right? And in response, I was told to maybe examine why I was choosing to experience these things that way. right? So in other words, I said, hey, this hurts me. And the response was, well, maybe you should focus on something else, right? That is misattunement, right? That is a failure to hear and acknowledge someone else's lived experience, someone else's truth. Okay. And I talk about this often because there are the facts of situations, right? The facts are completely objective, but the truth is grounded in experience and lived experience, right? And I'm setting this out in this particular way for this conversation, right? So please don't take me out of context. But there's the facts of what happened, and then there's the truth of the experience. What is true for you is not objective, right? Your lived experience is just that, is your lived experience. It is colored through your lens and how you are experiencing that thing. And so what we cannot do is tell someone else that their lived experience is false. We can't do that because their truth is their truth, just like your truth is your truth, right? And in a world full of human beings, we have to be able to navigate in a space where multiple truths coexist, whether we agree with them or not, right? The truth doesn't care about whether you agree. The truth is the truth. So when I talk about verbal violence, right, I am talking about any act that mutes, silences, distorts, or diminishes someone else's lived experience. It is trying to make the truth not be the truth. Okay. And that can look like shushing people. That can look like telling people to shut up or yelling, trying to overpower people. That's microaggressions. That's condescension. That's mansplaining. These are all forms of verbal violence. And when someone tries to make us smaller, quieter, or less real, or less the truth, our nervous system naturally responds, right? We want to defend ourselves. We go to fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And that is where conflict starts. Okay. Now, I call this phenomenon community static, right? Because when we're in a good conversation, when we're vibing, when things feel good, right? When we're like in harmony, there's a resonance to it, right? It feels good. But when someone starts to get violent, when someone starts to try to make someone else feel smaller, when someone tries to erase another person's truth, that is necessarily going to create static, right? Now the vibes are off. Okay. Now we're getting discordant. Okay. And so I call that community static, right? When the microaggressions start entering the chat, when people start yelling, when someone says, oh, be quiet, right? All of that is now going to create static because it's going to start to dysregulate the nervous system, right? Now our vagus nerve, everything that's within us, right? Our spidey sensors are going to go off and tell us, oh, this is not safe. They're coming for you. Okay. I call that community static. So once violence enters the chat, that's where conversations start to go sideways. When static is in the space, when static is present, the nervous system gets dysregulated and we're no longer in connection. Now we're in full protection mode, right? And there's a lot of studies on this. Like if you look at the neuroscience and look at people who really study the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, when we go into protection mode, when we're in a high alert, energy gets redirected in our brain, right? So now we are not focused on connecting with people. We're not open to empathy. We're not open to really trying to understand. Instead, we go into protection mode. And so all of our energies, right? The body is designed to protect us first, right? So connection is getting shut down. And this is why so many conflicts escalate. It's not because people are incapable of relating to each other, but because nobody slowed down enough to really hear what was actually being said. And they can't hear it because of the static, right? And this is what brings me to like my second point today, right? Leadership, right? One of the key tasks of all leaders is to really learn how to regulate themselves first. And this is so important, right? We talk about emotional intelligence or EQ skills, right? Self-awareness is the number one EQ skill that leaders need because leaders need to be aware of what is going on with their nervous system, right? Before they try to lead anyone else. They need to know and be able to tune into when they are in harmony and when they are not, right? When they are dysregulated, is when they are not in harmony, right? When they are agitated, when like the body's in fight or flight, this like heightened sense of like, I can't connect right now because I need to protect myself. Leaders need to know what that looks like and feels like for themselves. And they need to know that more acutely than being able to recognize that in other people. And when I talk about emotional intelligence, right, I'm always going to start with these 4 key skills, but it's self-awareness, self-regulation, and then social awareness, social regulation. Leaders have to start with the self first, right? So that means self-awareness. And then you need to be close enough to your own triggers, right, to understand what made you feel unsafe, what has you in that heightened state, right? Because when your nervous system is that loud and is telling you to run or fight or fawn, right, it becomes impossible for you to hear anybody else, right? And this is why self-regulation matters, because leaders have to first be aware that they're in that heightened state and then learn how to soothe their nervous system so that that system becomes quiet enough on the inside so that they can listen well on the outside. And when leaders do not regulate themselves, conflict and violence just escalate. So instead of calming the nervous system, then they try to override it, right? Now we're going to talk over people. We're going to push through pain, fear, insecurity, right? We're just going to try to bulldoze through it, right? Last week, I was talking about listening, right? And how people trust us based on the quality of our listening. If you want to be a really, really good listener, you have to learn how to quiet your nervous system, right? I'm not talking about override. I'm talking about regulation, right? Bring yourself back down. Remind yourself that you are safe. There are all types of things you can do to do this. When I teach embodied communication, I remind people like water is free. You can always have it at your desk. Like take a sip of water, take 3 deep breaths, right? Have something that smells good on your desk, right? Put some essential oils on your wrist so you can do some of that, okay? Right? Nobody is perfect. Everybody has triggers, but the work of leadership is not to pretend that those triggers do not exist. The work is learning how to manage yourself and manage your triggers so you can remain in relationship with others, right? Because when your nervous system is doing all of this, we can't be in relationship. We can't do this, right? So this is why I don't believe in conflict resolution, right? This is my 3rd point for the day, y'all. We doing so good, right? So conflict resolution is not the goal, right? I already said multiple truths exist. They just do, right? People have different lived experiences. We are constantly making meaning of the objective facts all around us, and they get to mean different things to different people. That's what it is to be a human being, right? Your experience, my experience. We're in a conversation right now. We're on YouTube Live. Well, I'm on YouTube Live. You're watching a video, but we're having an experience, right? But I guarantee you the way you're experiencing this is not the way that I'm experiencing this. And that is true. Your experience is true. My experience is true, right? So it's really rare that we're going to have the exact same experience, right? So there's a lot of different truths that are always operating all at the same time. And that's really important, right? Because that means we get to relate to people across different lived experiences. And that means we get to navigate the distance between those experiences by hearing and acknowledging one another, right? So this is why I say conflict navigation is more useful than conflict resolution, right? We get to learn how to move in between the spaces of our lived experiences, right? It's more rich and dynamic of a way of living that way. So what that means though, is that we have to let go of the need to be right? We're not looking for an absolute version or absolute perspective. We have to let go of that so that we can really allow the multiple truths of life to exist. And then we can stay in relationship with far more people because we're allowing multiple truths to coexist. Great leaders do not erase differences. Great leaders learn how to move and navigate across differences. Okay. So, y'all, those are my nuggets today. I feel like, again, I did this last week too, where I thought I was going to be all over the place and things ended kind of really well after the 20-minute mark. Y'all let me know if I need to go deeper on these. I am happy to. I will probably circle back to a lot of these concepts because I talk about this stuff all of the time. But it really is about how can we, if we call ourselves leaders, how can we choose not to compromise our own truth or anyone else's either, right? No one should have to do that. That means in the way that we speak to each other, it gets to be nonviolent. That means we're not trying to overpower, overshadow, minimize anything, right? It all gets to be present. It all gets to be expressed. And if it's going to be expressed, then by golly, we should acknowledge it, right? Last week, we talked about listening. This week, we're talking about regulating and like tuning down your own static so you can be in attunement with other people so that it doesn't cost us relationship. Okay. So if we want to stay in relationship, that's one of the keys. If you want to stay in relationship with me, when I think about my experience, the one that I shared with you about the coaching program, to stay in relationship with me, all I was looking for is people saying, oh, I understand how this exercise could be read as really insensitive. We did not consider that. Or, you know what? I see how this film could trigger feelings about race-based and gender-based violence that is not aligned with the themes of integrity we wanted to communicate. I get it, right? Which is, I think, what most people are searching for, is for someone else to say, I get it. I hear you, right? That makes sense, right? I tell you, the beauty of being in communication, being in relationship with other people, is being able to share experience and feel like someone else understands where you are coming from, and that you're not like crazy and alone in your experience, right? That's all we want to hear, is someone to say like, oh, I get it. I see it. I hear you, right? And so when I say attunement, that's what I'm talking about. That's what attunement looks like. What it sounds like is someone saying, I get it. I hear you. I see you. There's a beautiful video. Well, it's kind of funny. It's beautiful and it's like kind of funny. If you do a search on YouTube, I'm sure you'll find It's Not About the Nail, which is a beautiful expression of, I use it actually sometimes when I teach level 3 listening, but really looking at how valuable it is for people to not try to solve a problem, but instead to actually hear what someone's saying and experiencing, right? That is more important than solving a problem, right? Look up that video. I'll see if we can put it in the show notes so you can find it, or in the description of this video, so you can find It's Not About the Nail, but it's a beautiful demonstration of this concept. But when you acknowledge someone's experience, even if it's not your own, right? Just by acknowledging that someone else had an experience, you create an opportunity for a relationship. And that's the point, right? There's the facts and then there's the truth. One is what happened. The other is how we experienced it. You should be able to acknowledge how someone else experiences something without getting defensive about it, right? Your truth and their truth don't have to be in conflict. And great leaders learn how to navigate that, right? People get to experience life differently, and we get to acknowledge all of it. So again, goal is not about erasing differences. We just need to learn how to navigate them in order to build aligned relationships. If you are picking up what I'm putting down on this episode, I would love to see your comments. Let me know how verbal violence shows up for you in your world. Do people talk over you? Do people try to make you feel small? Do people know that they're having that effect on you? Have you told them? And how do you self-soothe enough so that you can have those conversations? Sometimes self-advocacy becomes really hard because we're so dysregulated, right? We get triggered and now like our chest is thumping in our chest, our heart is thumping in our chest, and like we're afraid to say the thing or afraid to speak up, right? It feels really high stakes. And so I'm curious, what do you do to calm yourself down? I already mentioned some of my go-tos, like drinking water and taking deep breaths, or like, I always have like essential oil here on my wrist. So I might like go for my essential oils. So looking at how are those things available to you in the moment that allow you to really regulate your nervous system and come back to yourself. This is something I talk about this in my book. There's a whole section on level 3 listening and kind of exploring community static, which I cannot wait to share this book with you, y'all. It's taking forever to birth. But for right now, again, if you are picking up what I'm putting down, please like, subscribe, comment, share. Let someone watch this video who you know needs to hear it. Next time on the Resonant Leader, I will be joined with the beautiful, the luminous Dr. Chanel Evans. We are talking about resilience and post-traumatic growth. She's actually a scholar of this concept, post-traumatic growth. And so we're going to be talking more about what happens on the other side of harm. Obviously, today we talked a lot about verbal violence and how that shows up and what it costs us, relationship, which arguably is everything. But next week with Dr. Chanel, we'll be talking more about the shadow side of resilience, as well as the opportunity for growth and what that looks like. How do we leverage harm to propel us forward? I'm sure I'm not saying that right, but come back next week and Dr. Chanel will keep it all together for us. But like I said, like, subscribe, comment. I appreciate you. And definitely check out the description of this video to find out more about the book or to find that video that I talked about. All right, y'all. I'll see you next time. Marie out.